Oh, hey, CNFers, it being that Atavistian time of the month, there are some spoilers during this podcast, okay? Visit magazine.atavist.com to read the story and maybe consider subscribing. I don't get any kickbacks, so you know my recommendation and my partnership with those beautiful people at the Atavist Magazine is pure, okay?
That my style has taken a toll, as like right now I'm wearing sweatpants and a sweater and like the sweatpants go up to my chest.
Oh, this is the Creative Nonfiction Podcast, a show where I speak to badass people about telling true stories, be it narrative journalism, essays, memoirs, documentary film, podcast. We do it all, man. I'm Brendan O'Mara. How's it going? How are those dishes? Are you scraping off all the stuff before you put it in the dishwasher? Got to clean that filter out. That filter gets nasty, especially if you're working in with chia seeds. Those things get... Happy Halloween, everybody. Well, as I tape this, it's Halloween, but this hits the feed on November 1st, so happy November. How is it November? How are we debating whether to put a fascist in the White House or not? How is it close? Why is it close? We're all on edge. I'm not smart enough to offer ways of coping with the anxiety, nor can I offer words of encouragement or solace, but we can focus on the writing and the power of the word. So here we are. We have Mira Ptacin, a writer and journalist who lives on a tiny island off the coast of Maine. And she came to this wonderful story for the Atavist that deals with the paradox of tolerance, which she learned about in her tight-knit community. And the yarn unspools from there as this community learns that there is a neo-Nazi in a town. And how did they drive this guy out? I'll give more details about Mira shortly, but first we're going to hear from Editor-in-Chief Sayward Darby, who riffs about her side of the table of this story, and also the media's grand shortcomings in covering far-right extremists, something she knows all too well, having written a book about it in Sisters in Hate. So why waste any more time? Okay? Here's Sayward Darby.
There's probably not enough coverage, but there is a lot of coverage of the rise of fascism, not just sort of at the heart of the MAGA project, but around the fringes in the United States, and it really can feel overwhelming. It can feel incredibly dark because it is, and I think what Mira does really nicely here is she doesn't shy away from the darkness. I mean, this is some really intense stuff. What this guy believes, how he behaves. The things that he's done, the things that he says he wants to do. But at the same time, the story is ultimately about hope. And she speaks at one point about how the community she is sort of, documenting and their response to him showing up there provides a model for, how can people rally and say that's not acceptable here. And so I think that definitely tempers the darker elements. I think too that Mira just has a really lovely writing voice, and she brings a personal flair to it because this takes place in rural Maine. She lives on an island in Maine, and so brings a lot of like personal energy to it. But she also just, I don't know, her writing just has a natural lightness to it, and I think that it was really well suited for the topic and kind of striking the right tone.
Well, there's an element of mainstream, or even not even mainstream, but let's just say like newspapers, they might know there are these far-right extremists in the community, but they feel that shining a light or giving voice to that is going to perpetuate it. So but it's kind of just the opposite. So how has journalism failed in its coverage of far-right extremism and maybe led to its perpetuation?
Oh, yes, Brendan, one of my favorite questions. Because I got asked this a lot when I was working on my book. The question of why are you even bothering to cover these people? Aren't you just giving them oxygen? Aren't you just giving them a platform? And to me, that's such a wrong-headed response because they already have so many platforms, like so many platforms, and when one gets taken away from them, they find another one. And if you're not putting what they're saying and what they're doing and who they are under a critical light, then you're actually like just kind of letting them run wild. And so I think that it is quite the opposite of platforming or giving oxygen, as long as you are putting a critical eye on it. I do think that, back in 2016 and sort of the lead up to it, there were a lot of issues with the, Nazi next door stories about like, look at this seemingly normal guy in a suit who shops at the same grocery store as all of us, and he happens to like Hitler. There was a little bit more of a like, isn't this a novelty? Isn't this an oddity way of writing about this stuff? And I think that really did a disservice to the discourse, and we're still, recovering from that and kind of working our way out of the hole that dug. But I also think that there was flippancy, like I just mentioned, for maybe the guys who weren't wearing suits and shopping at the same grocery store, but had Nazi tattoos on their faces and were showing up at Trump rallies. There was a bit of a like, haha, look at these idiots, look at these losers. Like, don't they know that World War II ended a long time ago? As opposed to, again, kind of putting them, taking them seriously, putting not just who they are, but what they were saying, where they were getting their ideas, how they were organizing, like the ways in which like Trump was giving them very long coattails on which to, kind of plop themselves and get, dragged into the political arena. I think that there was like a huge disservice done there. And then, I mean, quite frankly, I think that there's been way too much of a fixation, even of late. Like, this is something that I've been grumbling about to my husband, that people, the story in the Atlantic about Trump saying, I want, my generals to, treat me like Hitler, basically, or I can't remember, that's a terrible summary, but like, the ones where it's like, he basically admires Hitler and the absolute devotion that his generals gave him. I'm so much less interested at this point in whether or not Trump likes Hitler, because like he is a fascist, and like having this conversation about is he or is he not, it's like he is and he has been, and if you're just like coming to the party, like congrats, welcome, we're out of punch and cookies, to use a phrase that someone else once used with me when describing what it was like to a person of color when they saw Trump got elected in 2016. But what's more interesting, the question is, why are so many people embracing this, right? It's not just, people who are going to vote for Trump already know this stuff. Like the fact of him saying, I want my generals to respect me like his generals respected Hitler. Like, they're not going to say, oh, I'm not going to vote for that guy because of that. It's just not going to happen, So then the question becomes, well, why are they okay with it? Like, what about his message and what about, the way that they see politics and see society makes them essentially embrace a fascist future? And I think that the media they're very fixated. I mean, first of all, the media is just consistently fixated on the horse race of the actual election. And really started talking about the core sort of stakes too late. We should have been talking about fascism, quite frankly, years ago, and not in a like, don't use that word, that seems too intense. It's like, no, it is what it is. Let's call it what it is, and let's be afraid of it and work to stop it. So that's all coming too late now, and I think that's in part because the media is still, treats this like horse race journalism, and it's better for them when the race is closer. It's better for them when they can, try to put the candidates on some kind of equal footing. But now that we're having that conversation about, is this fascism? Again, it's less, is he a fascist? Are his like immediate, circle fascists? And it's more, what about all these people showing up at his rallies? What about all the people who are going to cast votes for him? What does it say about where we are and like what our problems are as a society when, millions of people are embracing that? And I think that we're really just, political journalists especially, are just kind of behind on addressing that question.
And with Mira's piece, and just in unpacking it just a little bit, in some of the backstory of it, she had pitched it to a different place. It was a little thin in terms of word count. And then even when she was working with you, it was still on the thin side. It was like maybe around 5,000. You're like, we need to up this. And what was it that you wanted to see upped to give it that more rounded, fuller Atavistian portrait?
I seem to remember the initial structure, it was more essayistic, right? It wasn't so concerned with sort of the chronology of him arriving and how people rallied, how they discovered who he was and then started, making moves to basically let him know he was not welcome. And so one of the first things I did was, I've said this before on the podcast, but I made a timeline, right? And so I understood, from the moment that he basically decided to move to Maine, bought the property, made a timeline of key moments. And there were some that we hadn't, like the original draft just didn't address at all. Like tell me the first time Crashberry, the local journalist who was on this guy's tail pretty much before anybody else, when did he first find out about this guy? When did he find the deed that let him know where he had bought land? When did he publish his, first newsletter or podcast episode, I think it was, about him? And so getting this timeline in place, because that really helped note where action was going to be happening, and then finding the moments of action that we could really expand on, scene and action. I think the bones of the story were definitely already there. And then from an Atavist standpoint, not that it needs to go strictly chronologically, in this case, it more or less does. To make it more Atavisty, it was like, okay, rather than kind of having this be a think piece, we want it to feel like a narrative that has, think bits in it. And so, by way of example, Mira, there's the lovely passage where she talks about how she learned about this guy for the first time in a church sermon, and that church sermon itself, which is about the paradox of tolerance, really sort of creates for a way of talking about the bigger themes of the story. And that was always, that was in the original essay. We knew we wanted to keep that, but we positioned it in such a way that, we were kind of putting it side by side with the actions that individuals were taking, that were in keeping with sort of wrestling with the paradox of tolerance, if you will. And I think it worked out really well. I think to your point that you made at the beginning of the conversation, like, it's a good read. Like, it's just given the intensity of the topic, it's you kind of roll through it. And I think that has to do with Mira being a great writer, but then also the way that we ultimately shaped it into a narrative. So, the central question is, what's going to happen? Like, are they going to get this guy? Are they going to find out where he is and figure out how to make him leave? And like, what mechanisms are they going to use? Because, there's a real question, whenever you're dealing with people like this, if they're exercising their right to free speech and they're not committing, crimes against their neighbors, like, what do you do? How do you react? How do you make a stand? And I think that it's interesting to see the various ways that people decided to make a stand, and we're kind of working in the story up to that moment. And then obviously, the aftermath, like the where is he now and what is he doing? And it turns out that the answer is really, really, really upsetting.
Nice. Yes. Okay. So Mira Ptacin is the author of the memoir Pour Your Soul and The In-Betweens. She's an award-winning memoirist, narrative journalist, editor, and book doula. She teaches creative writing, and her work has appeared in the New York Times Book Review, the New York Times, Vogue, Poets and Writers, Harper's, Tin House, and more. There's always more. We talk about her move from New York City to this tiny island off the coast of Maine, and how she makes living the paradox of tolerance, and how if you're tolerant of intolerant people, tolerance then gets snuffed out. Lots of good stuff to chew on here as she spins this incredible yarn about a courageous journalist who susses out who this neo-Nazi named Hammer infiltrates this community and looks to build a compound through which he can train and try to build a white supremacist ethno-state in Maine, and the people in that community, once they heard about it, were not having it. You can learn more about Mira at miraptacin.com, MiraPtacin, and you can follow her on the gram at Mira Ptacin. All those links and such will be at brendanamara.com. Hey. No parting shot this week since we're running a little bit long. So here we are, talking about the crash of the hammer. Mira's piece for the Atavist Magazine. Riff. Well, to your point about how everyone knows each other, there's one line I highlighted in one of the several lines I highlighted in your story was when you saw this one woman, and she's like, there's something you should know about living here. If we don't know anything about you, we'll make something up. And if we like our story better, we'll stick to it.
It's so true. You cannot live anonymously. And I guess this is a decent segue into the story where Maine, and in particular, like this island we live on, is very representative of, the larger community of Maine. You think, because Maine is so, it's kind of like exotic, more or less. It's not warm, but it's exotic. And, there's like a style of Maine. People think about Maine, they think about lobsters, they think about sailboats. And when people come here on vacation, they dress the part. They wear their seersucker. They have these like nautical outfits, and that they're from away. And people say they're from away. If you're not from here, you're from away. It's very representative of this island. Is representative of Maine. You think you're anonymous here, but you are seen. You are seen immediately. It's kind of like you go to New York City, you feel seen because there's so many people and everybody's looking at what other people wearing and who do you know, blah, blah, blah. And I used to live in New York City before moving to Maine. So we thought we'd come into Maine and just slide right in. But within a few weeks of living on this island, we went to Hannigan's grocery store, whose motto is, if we don't have it, you don't need it. So we go to, so guess we don't need vegetables, but we go to Hannigan's grocery store, and one of the clerks says to us, if we don't know anything about you, we're going to make something up. And if it's true, but if it's not true, but we like that story, we're going to stick with it. So you really have to watch what you do here. If you're an asshole, it will reverberate and people will pick up on it just as much as you are really, really sort of required to help your neighbor on this island. We're in it together, more or less. And it took me a little while to realize that when we moved here. I didn't think anybody noticed, but you do notice. You notice immediately who doesn't live here.
Oh my gosh. So how did you come to live on this little island off the coast of Maine?
Oh my goodness. Okay, well, I'll try to make this story interesting, but it was really kind of throwing a dart on the calendar and saying, my husband Andrew and I were living in New York City. I moved there from Michigan to go to graduate school. He moved there for work, and we met online and we got married eventually. And we have 2 dogs, and we didn't have children at the time. We had these 2 dogs, Huckleberry and Maybe, and we love our dogs. So we would take them to the dog run or the dog park every damn day, morning and night. Eventually we lived in Prospect Park, and we would take our dogs to Prospect Park for off-leash hours in the morning and at night. And that was so much of our life revolved around that. Our social life was there. But our dogs, they're rescue dogs, and they were triggered by people that had sort of large accessories. Like if somebody had a big hat on, or if someone had dreadlocks, or if someone had lots of bags, anything that was larger than just this like skinny body, they would get really excited over. So they had some police records for nipping at people. And so we had like one nip to go until the dogs were taken away. And they're great dogs, but they were picking up on our stress too of just living in the city. So I was actually at AWP in Chicago, and Andrew texted me and he's like, okay, this is the date and we're leaving no matter what. We're leaving New York. So we decided Maine because it's a beautiful place to live. It's close enough to New York, but far away enough. It's remote. And we just rented a U-Haul and moved here with nothing. We had $1,000. Neither one of us had a job. We were living in a Super 8 motel. We found a rental on Peaks Island just to check it out. It was on Craigslist. We went to check it out, and it was just this magical little island, very Whoville, and it was affordable. So we decided to give it 1 year because living on an island in Maine is wonderful in the summertime, but it's very isolated and different in the wintertime. In Maine, it gets dark at like 2 p.m. So, and everything shuts down here at like 5 p.m. And there's everything meaning a grocery store. So we gave it a try. We fell in love with it and we decided to stay. And then a house went up for sale. It never was on the market, actually. It was very cheap. And we bought it. And then we started getting jobs. I sold my first book. I sold my second book. And really our roots sunk in deep. And the people who live here are kind of like our family. It's sort of like a semi-intentional community here on the island. There's 500 people, but it feels like, 50.
That's amazing. And
it was very spontaneous.
Yeah. And as as a writer in such a small place that's removed from the hubs that we typically associate with where where writers live and make a living, how have you navigated that aspect of being a writer in a remote place?
I love this question. When I lived in New York, I was in my mid 20s, late 20s, and it was very inspiring, but it was really stressful because there were a lot of people and there were a lot of writers. And it was like, who's new? Who's got the book coming out? Whose book launch do we go to? Whose reading do we go to? Who's getting published where? It became really social, and it was less about craft for me, but like attending events or making sure I signed up for reading events. And the books I started reading were like, they were galleys or advanced review copies. And that was exciting and the energy was fantastic, but it really got in the way with like my internal rhythm and what naturally I would be reading or what I would naturally be doing with my time when I wasn't writing. So living here, it's really like my style has taken a toll, as like right now I'm wearing sweatpants and a sweater and like the sweatpants go up to my chest. But I don't care. Like what I read is supplementing what I'm working on. When I'm not writing, I'm outside. I might be cleaning our chicken coop, or I might be going on a walk with a neighbor who is not involved in the literary community whatsoever, but is, I don't know, what do our neighbors do? I mean, it just, the people we live next to have, like, there's a garbage man, and then there's an architect, and then there's a cartographer. Everyone's so different. So I feel like I'm learning so much more, and my net is cast wider than it was in New York. I think this also just comes with age. I'm 45 now, and I was in my like prime in New York around 28. But it also helps me find the story, like because my life is much more rich, and I can really choose what I want to do with my time. It's much slower here. I really can listen to my intuition loudly. So, here I actually thought about writing my next book about living on this island because it's such a magical way of living. We've never locked our door. I don't even think we have a key. My kids walk to school, and then after school, I don't know where they are. They come home when it gets dark. My son is in the woods all the time tracking deer. He's 11. So, like it's just this really idealistic way of living. and I was going to write about it, but I decided that I don't want to shit where I eat.
Yeah.
And just like once I heard the author and a friend of mine, Takira Madden, say, this story I'm just going to keep to myself. And it didn't really resonate with me until I decided just a few weeks ago not to write about where I live and the people I live with. That's just something I can keep with myself. And so one of the things I do with my time is and gets me off the island. That's another thing. It can become like this magnetic pull, and also sort of like a black hole. To leave the island, it can be hard. It's a 20-minute boat ride. And when people leave the island, they say they're going to America. So like, when we go to America, you choose wisely what you're going to do with your time. Just like in New York, when like you get on the subway, you map out all the places you're going to go, so it's not just a waste of time. So when you go to America, you figure out what you're going to do with your time there. And so on Mondays, I go to a women's prison, and I've been going there for 12 years since I moved to the island. And just maybe like 2 weeks ago, I decided that instead of writing about myself, I'm going to write about one of the inmates there. She's fascinating. Her name's Katrina, and she's been in this prison for, I think, 22 years. And when she first started, she's in for she murdered someone. She murdered her boyfriend when she was young. And when she started at this prison, everything she wrote in the memoir class that I was teaching was just so dark and just very depressed and just really sad and hopeless. And something happened. It's not me. It was her. I just could see it because she's writing and journaling. She has turned a corner and made her life behind bars fucking incredible. She's teaching philosophy of love classes on Zoom at MIT and stoicism to students at MIT. Isn't that amazing?
That is incredible.
I just think that that's the most inspiring thing. I cannot complain about anything in my life. So that's what I'm diving into now. But I think if I were living in it, to like long answer to your question, if I were living in the city, I don't think I would be able to focus so well on just a single random person. I think New York did something to my ego that I really needed to tear away from.
Yeah, that kind of gets to what moving away from such an epicenter of writers did to your sense of competition and comparison.
It really ripped off the Band-Aid, because also I fell in love with Maine so much. I really didn't care what was going on anywhere else. Yeah. But there is this, like, when you write, you have to tell yourself, you have to find this balance of like, I am the worst writer in the world and I'm the best writer in the world.
Right.
And it's like, there's not really ever a weak equilibrium or homeostasis. It's just like every second it's this push-pull. So that came back. It's too ingrained in my, what do you call it? The bridges in your brain, whatever those are called.
Synapses.
Yes. Yeah. Whatever you keep telling yourself, you'll start to believe. So that's just always been in there. And I still feel like if I see someone I know post something that's like, oh, Publishers Marketplace, I have a new book, I'm like, shit, it's been 4 years since I published a book.
Yeah.
And then I have to talk myself off the ledge. But we do have a great literary community here, but it's smaller and it's dorkier and it's less competitive. And we have, amazing writers. On the island, there's writers. We have a lot of kids' book illustrators and writers. But right off the 20-minute ferry ride in Portland, we have the Maine Writers and Publishers Alliance. And they just had this great literary festival. And we had, oh my gosh, Melissa Fabos was just here. Morgan Talty lives in Maine. Mike Paterniti. Everybody who I'm not mentioning is here. Lily King lives here. So we have these great writers, and it's easy to see them because there's kind of so few of us. There's other people than Stephen King. I never see Stephen King. No one sees Stephen King, but there's just a smaller community, and it's just slower, and it's really supportive. It's really beautiful. So we're still kind of in the know. We have internet access, of course, and but it's just you really slow down and think cautiously about what you're going to put your time into. And also the stories are I feel really lucky to be a journalist in Maine too, because it's such a big state. And I don't know, I think it's easier for me to find stories. Like how do I find a story? Sometimes I just go outside and walk around, and I swear a story will pop up. I had a student when I taught at a documentary school called the Salt Institute for Documentary Studies.
Mm-hmm.
And one of my students could not find a story. He was supposed to write about anything in Maine, any person in Maine. And I just go outside and walk around and just see what happens. And the first person he comes across is this man who is whistling. And he's known as the Whistler because it's such a small place. You start to see the same people everywhere you go. And every time I would see this man, he's whistling obnoxiously. And he said, I saw this guy, the Whistler. I know who the Whistler is. So the Whistler, we learned, he walks and whistles everywhere he goes, but some rule was created in Portland, Maine, in the city, where you're not allowed to stand and whistle for more than like 5 minutes. Because of this man was driving so many people crazy with his whistling, he has to keep moving and he has to keep walking when he's whistling. So there's a story. So, everywhere you go, you can find something. You just have to like slow down and listen.
Oh, that's great. It's I always like talking about that comparison trap too. You looking online, and to your point of you have to be delusional enough to like be like, I'm a great writer one day and a shitty one the next day, sometimes within the same hour. And
every 5 minutes.
yeah, exactly. And when you're feeling like that, and then you're seeing what people might post, and just comparing your own trajectory to somebody else's, and it always feels like you're not where you want to be, or it's a really hard headspace through which to then generate work or even be a contributor to the literary community at large. So it's like, how have you just metabolize that or work through that?
It's such a beast. It's like, you feed which wolf you decide to feed. I'm really bad at it. So I just like, I have to do extremes. If I start getting in a rut psychologically, I will, not always. I mean, sometimes I just pull the covers over my head and just think nonstop about how shitty I am. But also I'll do things like I will sign up for something that has nothing to do with writing, but it's so big and of a commitment that I like have to pull away largely. Like this year I signed up for a 10K and a fundraiser. So I had to hold myself accountable to something not that had to do with writing. So I found value in some other place besides writing. That's one thing I do, just like make sure I nurture other aspects of my life, especially like community service. Another thing I try to tell myself is that comparison is the death of creativity. I tell myself that a lot. I try to change my way of thinking. Like my therapist, I have a therapist I see every 2 weeks. My therapist has me do this exercise where I literally have a pair of heart-shaped rose-colored glasses on my desk. And every time I am writing and I start thinking something that's counterproductive, I have to put them on. And like it's a reminder not to see myself through poop colored glasses, but through like heart-shaped rose colored glasses. And it's just this act of stopping a certain way of thinking by doing something physical. And so that kind of helps. And another thing I try to tell myself is I try to remind myself that like the books that people are writing are going to contribute and help make the world a better place. Or if not, it's a capitalistic endeavor that I don't want anything to do with. Like if it's a shitty book and it's published just to make money and someone took like cut a corner and it's really clear, I just kind of like stay away. But if someone wrote a book that I would never want to write, I'd like, great, the world needs this book. So, but it's really hard. I mean, I try not to, and also I'll just like delete social media if it's feeding the bad wolf. But I mean, I think every writer does it. I really do. If not, then they're holier than I am.
So tell me about how you locked into this story that you've got for the Atavist.
Oh my God. Okay. It was such an accident. I really do think that if I look back on my career and it's like a bullet point list or a CV of all the good things that have happened, all of them are like accidents. You know, the first book I published, I will say no one, and it was a Kirkus Best Book of the Year. No one would publish it. It took me 8 years to sell it. My agent of the time said, let's just put it away and start the next book. But I sent it off to publishers on my own. I sent an email that was like, I'm representing myself like a boss, and would hit send, and it finally worked. So everything is like accidental. With this piece, it ties into Peaks Island where I live. We have a community church, the New Bracket Church, that we attend. It's like an everything bagel of a church. We have atheists, we have Jewish folks, we have Christians, we have Buddhists, we have people just going for the food at the end of church. It's an amazing place. We have an amazing pastor, Reverend Will Green, and he's always open to, and his sermons are really just like philosophical lectures or call to social activism. And so my husband Andrew, he is an architect and an engineer. We are completely different brains. He is an Excel worksheet, and I am like a washing machine. And he is so much smarter than me, and just well read, and just he's so brilliant. And he approached Reverend Will and said, "Have you ever heard of the paradox of tolerance? And if so, will you give a sermon on the paradox of tolerance?" I didn't know this until a Sunday rolls around and Reverend Will starts talking about the paradox of tolerance. I did not know what the paradox of tolerance is, and I'll explain what it is. So the paradox of tolerance is an idea that's credited to this philosopher named Karl Popper. He was an Australian-British philosopher, and he published something, I don't remember, it was something like the Open Society, something like that, and after World War II. And what he says about the paradox of tolerance is if we extend unlimited tolerance to those who are intolerant, then the tolerant will be destroyed and tolerance with them. So Reverend Will, we're like, hold on, math, like say that again. But then he gave this example of a neo-Nazi named Hammer who had moved from Texas to Maine, assuming that he would be hidden and camouflaged. He bought a lot of land in Springfield, Maine, which is basically all forest, and some people, I think population 300, something like that. So he bought all this land with the intention of creating a neo-Nazi training camp and recruiting neo-Nazis to strength train and practice their, I don't know, penis comparisons, whatever they do, building just hate and planning to turn Maine into a white ethno state and using violence if necessary, and taking on war brides, meaning like kidnapping women and forcing them to live with them, and possibly impregnating them to keep the population going. Just crazy philosophies. But we didn't know this yet. All Reverend Will knew was there's a neo-Nazi. We're trying to recruit people to join him and turn Maine into a white ethno state. And although in our church or in society, we encourage all types of people, there has to be a limit. There has to be a limit because neo-Nazis do not encourage all types of people. So if we let neo-Nazis just be, then they will be intolerant of other people, and it's just going to be a hot fucking mess. And so so I heard about this, and our newspapers were not covering this and the reason they weren't covering this neo-Nazi camp is because they didn't want to give him press. They didn't want to, make him popular or known. They just wanted him to just disappear and go away. I thought this was really frustrating, and I decided, like, how long is this going to stick in my head? And how long is this going to be an itch that I cannot scratch? And if it still bothers me within like a couple of weeks, it's time to write about it. So it bothered me a lot, and I decided, this is crazy. I have to write about this. So I started pitching this story. I pitched it first before Atavist. I pitched it to Guernica, and they said yes. And it was a shorter piece, maybe 1,500 words, and I wrote it. And it was mostly about, it was more like the who, what, when, where. And it was brief, and we were moving along. And then unfortunately, something happened at Guernica where they went on hiatus. There was, did you hear about this?
No.
Oh, okay. So this was, it was about 7 months ago. And Guernica, I never know how to say it. They're an amazing publication of politics and art, and they're very left-leaning. And so they published a piece by an Israeli translator and peace activist. And this was kind of closer to the beginning of the genocide in Palestine. And a lot of the editors were really upset about this piece being published and giving a voice to Israel when, there are so many people being slaughtered. So I didn't know about this until I got an email from my editor at Guernica saying, there's a lot of shit going down right now, and I'm resigning. You can keep your piece and work with a different editor, or you choose what you want to do. And I decided to pull the piece because I cared a lot about this piece, and I love Guernica so much as a publication, but I didn't want it to get lost in the shuffle of things. And also the magazine just stopped for a while. I don't know when it's going to run again. And I felt this piece was timely and urgent. So so it was like months of work, and also just urgent. There's this guy who wants to turn my state into a white ethno state, and also Maine, I should note, is a very, very white state. I think it's the whitest state in the country. We don't want this. And so I started pitching it all over the place, and I pitched it every possible literary magazine or journalistic reportage place you could think of. And one of those places was the Atavist, and I got a response from Sayward. And one thing I loved about Sayward is that she had written a book recently called Sisters in Hate. And it's she spent years with white supremacist women. And so it was like a match made in heaven. And I love working with women editors too. And Sayward and I just like clicked, and she has been in the trenches with this kind of stuff, and I'm pretty new to it. This is the first time I've written about neo-Nazis. And so I said yes, and I said yes to the dress, and we started working together. But then and I was like so exhausted and like dripping in neo-Nazi shit that I was so tired of it. But then Sayward said, your piece is about, I think maybe it was 5,000 words, but we publish pieces that are 10,000 words and more. So you're going to have to, up it. And so then I moved on to the second phase of the reporting, and it wasn't just about, what I'd heard about the neo-Nazis, and it was go to the camp. It was really get deeper and deeper into the story of these neo-Nazis, visit the camp. And then there's a bigger part of this piece that I haven't mentioned yet. And this is this guy, Crash Berry. He's one of the few remaining kind of like muckraking private investigator reporters that I have heard of, where he actually like gets dressed in disguise And he's not an armchair reporter. He goes into the belly of the beast. And one of the bigger things about this story, The Crash of the Hammer, is that it's not just about this neo-Nazi camp that was happening. It's the story of how the story was spread. Because newspapers weren't really reporting on Hammer and his camp and his goals, how did people find out about it? Crash was kind of Crashberry was the spark of the world learning about Hammer and his training camp in Maine. So Crash is a homesteader, a lumberjack. He's done everything from like working on alpaca farms. He's been a journalist for decades and decades and decades. He's done everything. He writes about shitty people in Maine, shitty people in power of Maine, and he gets in disguise and attends events that they're in. He creates, what do you call it? I think they're called like sock puppets, where he creates like a fake persona online and will be following these Nazi influencers on like social media and conversing with them. So he basically gets in there, and Crash spent years following Hammer, and it was through Crash where I learned about all these details of Hammer. So the story for the Atavist is not just about this, the paradox of tolerance or the neo-Nazis, but it's about this real old school reporter who really risks his life, in my opinion, to get stories out and independently reports them and independently shares them. And because of Crash, the story trickled out and people in Springfield started to learn about this neo-Nazi camp, and the word spread, and they were intolerant of this of this intolerant person. And because of Crash, the people of Springfield basically scared a Nazi out of town, and this Nazi felt it was too dangerous for him, who wants to turn Maine into a white ethno state with violence if necessary. He felt he was unsafe in Maine, and he left. So that's what the story is, and it was a lot. And I spent a lot of time with Crash too. I have 2 kids now, and I don't completely want to separate my work from my family, but also sometimes I have no choice because I'm a mother. So I'm also a soccer mom. So this soccer mom brought my kids to the neo-Nazi camp, and no one was there. And we also went to visit Crash at his homestead, and we stayed for a couple days and really got to know Crash. Amazing human. So now we call him Uncle Crash Defer. We're really good friends now. It was an amazing experience. So this short piece for Guernica turned into something that took over my entire life, and part of my family's life. And yeah, it was a wonderful experience.
What was the part of the story that broke it to a point of that 5,000 word story to something that did sustain the larger Atavistian word count? Like,
that's a good question. I think so one of a teacher I had in graduate school, his name's Vijay Seshadri. He's a poet and one of the best teachers I've ever had. And he told us that if what is on the surface of a story, like the who, what, when, where, why, is also what's kind of brewing underneath the surface, it's one-dimensional, and art is three-dimensional. Therefore, this is not art. So I think the first version that I wrote, the 5,000 word piece, was who, what, when, where, why. Like, this happened. Isn't this crazy? And end. But with the Atavist, and this is what Sayward really encouraged me to do when we spoke for the first time, is to really like breathe life into it. Make the characters three-dimensional. Show us like what they're doing when the camera's not rolling. Show us, I mean, it was, the basic show, don't tell. And the first piece I did, it was not art, it was reportage. Mm-hmm. And this piece is so much more artful. It shows, I mean, it has so much more detail that is showing us and not telling us. It has Hammer shitting in the woods because he doesn't have anywhere to go to the bathroom. It has Hammer carving apples and making apple cider at an Airbnb, which was eventually outed and banned for housing a neo-Nazi, and thanks to Crash, which got the word out to this town. It told us how not just like, you know, the townsfolk didn't want him there. They threatened to backhoe him into the ground and not tell anybody. Like, it was just, it came so much more alive. When we went to visit Crash, one of the most beautiful things I saw was how he was taking care of the animals on his homestead. And he told my kids, when I wasn't there, my son Theo and Simone, my daughter Simone, told me this. Crash told them, it's our job to take care of these animals and give them the best life possible. And he was talking about these 2 pigs that he rescued from a factory farm. And if I hadn't spent this time with Crash, seeing him in his tender moments, I just thought he would have been like this really hardcore, intimidating reporter. But he is really just this soft teddy bear of a person. So it was really, with the Atavist, and what I love so much about the Atavist is they want their stories to be 3-dimensional, and they're artful stories, even though they're fact-based.
Well, I think that it also speaks to the patience required to report a story of this nature, and just spending time with people if you can. It's hard in this climate, in this journalistic climate,
Sure.
to put forth those kind of resources and to be patient like that. But that patience did net that anecdote with your kids, which closes out the story about, you know, with the pigs and Christopher. And but yeah, so, you know, what is it about these stories that really requires that degree of patience as much as we might want to like rush to publish?
Oh gosh, you'll be entering through the side door instead of going through the front door. Because with readers, I think, at least for me, when I'm reading a book, often if it's nonfiction, if it's journalism, I see like the headline or the topic, and that's what grabs me. But then after a while, you get used to that big thing. You get used to the thing that you entered the front door through. And then what else is there? Like, who cares? So it's a neo-Nazi, and neo-Nazi, the worst thing you could imagine is a neo-Nazi, but then you get used to the fact that he's a neo-Nazi. It's like, so what?
Mm-hmm.
What else is there? What makes this like a living, breathing thing rather than just this flashy topic? So, and you learn to humanize people. I mean, as much as we want to like hate a neo-Nazi, what can we see in there that kind of helps us understand him a little more? Not like forgive him. I don't think I'll ever be there.
Yeah, that starts
But
to
what
tiptoe
happens-
into tolerance too, right?
Yes, yeah, I'm not there. But I will say, I didn't do that with this neo-Nazi. I didn't, and that was on purpose. There's enough that makes him interesting, and there's enough to write about. I had no intention of trying to find a way to empathize with him or sympathize. I'm not there, and I don't think I will be. So I did not hang out with a neo-Nazi for this story. I just got as much facts as I could via Crash. But I did spend a lot of time with Crash, and I still hang out with Crash. Like, when I first started working as a journalist or studying journalism, some of the teachers I had said, you know, like, never buy your subject a cup of coffee, because you don't want to have like any kind of like tit for tat exchange, like never have a relationship that's informal with them. And I think that's bullshit. Like, you can't, it's almost like if you're a photographer and you see a car crash, are you going to take pictures of it, or are you going to put down your camera and go like see if everybody's okay? And with spending all this time with humans, it's not objective. It's a relationship. So you know, Crash and I are buddies now. We met up for coffee and lunch in a park a couple weeks ago, and we met halfway. He lives about an hour from Lewiston, Maine. I live about an hour from Lewiston, Maine. So we met halfway. We met in a park. I get there, and I just left prison. I'm looking for Crash. I don't see him anywhere, but I do see a very tall man with who's kind of slumping around in the park with long hair and a big hat on. And I was like, no, that kid. And I looked at his shoes, and they were Paisley Crocs. And I know Crash wears Paisley Crocs. And it was Crash, and he came in disguise to this park just to surprise me. So, like, I mean, how are you not going to have a friendship with a person like that? So yeah, I think it is hard to slow down and just like wait for the proper amount of time a story requires. But if you don't, your editor is going to have you keep redoing the story and going back for more and more, especially if you have an editor of like Sayward's caliber. So it'll bite you in the ass eventually.
Mm-hmm. Well, I think what adds another layer of that rounds out the story and makes it more artful is your narration and your voice in the first person nature in which you deploy your own voice in the story. So was that ever present, and or if it, or how do you think about that aspect of the narration, whether you're going to be in or out of the story?
Yeah, totally. I mean, it was even more present before Sayward went in with her editing goggles on, and she toned my voice down a lot. And I think, I mean, I don't know. I think I like to write like I talk, and then I dramatize it a little bit more. And I think I went in this one knowing I wanted a casual voice because I wanted the reader to feel comfortable reading about something that's really upsetting. I mean, my mom she was born in Poland. We have relatives that were in Auschwitz. If I told her, I wrote a story about a neo-Nazi, do you want to read it? She would say no, but since I'm her daughter, she would want to read it, or I would make her read it. And to have like a calming, casual voice guiding the reader through the story makes it a little warmer and less, I don't know, less uptight and isolating and upsetting. It kind of makes the reader feel like you're next to this person rather than the person is like this omnipotent narrator from above, a godlike presence shouting down at you. So that's part of the thing. And also my insecurity as a writer chimed in and said, like, make yourself likable as a narrator because you don't want to lose the reader. But Sayward definitely toned down my voice a lot. I thought my voice was robotic in this one compared to what it was originally.
Oh wow! Well, yeah, I found a certain irreverent quality to your voice and a dryness to it that I appreciated with the story. I almost felt like you were this. If the small communities through which that drive this guy out are kind of like a snapshot of an episode of The Simpsons or something, I felt like you were like you were a really good observer of what was happening, and your little, kind of punchy, dry sentences of your observations here and there, I thought were, to me, a good pop of color. So,
thank you. I appreciate it.
Yeah, and I suspect maybe it feels robotic because you were on a different side of the dial maybe at first, and it came back a bit. But at least to me, reading it for the first time, it did feel there was a vibrancy and a freshness that I loved from your narration of it. What were some of the maybe hiccups or hurdles that you experienced while reporting the piece that you had to kind of work through, jump over, run through?
Yes, of course. Sure. Well, one of the biggies, I mean, it's always challenging for me to, put on my reporter hat, and I just assume no one wants to talk about certain things. Like my second book, The In-Betweens, it's about a camp of mediums that has been gathering, different mediums, but mediums that has been gathering since the late 1800s. And I spent a lot of time with these mediums, and I would assume that they're very defensive. I would be defensive if I were a medium. If I could see dead people, I would assume nobody believed me, and I would be very defensive. But so I was surprised that they were completely open to talking about their lives and what they see and hear. With Springfield too, I knew the town did not want to be known as a town, the neo-Nazi town of Maine. They want to move past it. I had read some quotes about this. I had talked to some Springfield locals about this that Crash connected me to. So when my family and I went to Springfield, we got a cabin in the woods, and my intention was to go find the neo-Nazi camp and also talk to locals. And I just picked up on the vibe that people do not want to talk about this. I also knew they didn't want to talk about it. So I brought my family with me, and we're going into, say, the general store, and I'm supposed to be asking questions to people, because it's like a 4-hour drive for us. I just kind of had one chance to do it, and I just didn't feel comfortable. So I bought some gum for my daughter, and we looked around the store, and I was like, how am I best going to use my time here if we're not going to be talking about a neo-Nazi? I'm going to write down what I see in the store and describe the scene and the setting. And then after we're paying for the gum, I didn't say, hi, I'm a journalist, and I would like to, I just said, so we're just passing through. Tell me about this. We heard about a neo-Nazi that used to live around here. And this woman said, I never had the pleasure of meeting him, but blah, 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 blah. So we got some quotes, but I just knew people didn't want to talk about it. So that was really hard. Also, it's a really, really rural area, so it's hard to catch people on the street. And then when I called different places in Springfield to see if people would talk to me, I cold called people. So many people hung up on me. No one wanted to talk about it. And that just I'm sensitive, so that made me feel bad. But I just, I kept moving on. And another thing was, how do I write about a neo-Nazi if I'm not going to spend hours listening to him rant on YouTube or whatever platform he was using? Crash had done all the dirty work. So how can I make sure I'm not just using Crash and all the legwork he did for my story? I'm letting Crash tell the story because he's the one who found it. And I think those were the two biggies. People didn't want to talk about it, and I didn't want to spend hours and hours and hours listening to a neo-Nazi, but it all worked out.
Oh, I tell you, Mira, I hate cold calling. It's the
God.
You would think when I tell people that I hate talking on the phone, I hate cold calling, they're like, you're a journalist. I'm like, I hate it. And I tell them you'd be surprised how many reporters hate fucking cold calling and hate talking on the phone. Hate it.
It's the worst.
Yeah.
It's the worst. I hate talking on the phone. I never answer my phone, and I never call people. I always find any way possible of just slipping it in a different way. I mean, I don't know how. Become a birthday party clown, and that's how you start to interview people. I don't know. Any way possible.
I know. So some of if I have people on the show who have been reporters for 40 years, back that predate email, they've developed a muscle around the phone where they just it's just what you do. I don't even think about it. I just pick up the phone, call all day long. Yeah. And after email and stuff, it's harder and harder, but it just doesn't really align with my personality to make those kind of calls. That salesmanship, you need to really sell yourself in 15 to 20 seconds so they don't hang up on you or on a voicemail that they might call you back. And it's the worst. Right. I just hate it. But it's the job, I guess. So yay for us.
We got to put it out there.
Well, Mira, this has been an awesome conversation. What I love doing at the end of these conversations is asking the guest, you in this case, for a recommendation of some kind. And that's just anything you're excited about that you want to share with the listeners.
Oh, yeah. I will tell you right now. I have a few. So there's a journalist who I love so very much, that I feel like he's not as well known as others, but he's one of the best writers I've ever read, and his name is Michael Paternini.
Oh, he's the best.
And oh my
yeah,
God.
I'm looking right at Love. Where's his collection? I've got it on my bookcase.
Ways of Dying.
Yeah, I love him. Long Fall of 111 Heavy was just a masterpiece that. Anyway, keep going. Paternity. I know who you're talking about. He's a master.
Read Mike Paternini. He also did a really amazing piece on, I think it was This American Life. So he does everything, and he and his wife Sarah are amazing, great people. They have a nonprofit that they started called the Telling Room, and
great book.
It's also it's one of Mike's books, and the Telling Room is this nonprofit for youth interested in writing, and it's an after-school program. It's free for everyone. So I would say look at the Telling Room online. I think it's just thetellingroom.org. And Mike Paternini's writing, if you want to learn how to write well, read Mike Paternini. I also started reading recently Sarah Gerard's new book, Caroline Coco. And Sarah's written fiction. She has a collection of essays. And this is a new book of hers of investigative reporting. And she's writing about a friend of hers who was killed by her roommate, the friend's roommate. And it's an amazing piece. She's done so much work. And now Sarah, after jumping into something personal happened to her, and she decided to write about this. And now she's going to get her master's in criminal law or something like that. So I think she's an amazing person. So I think those are the two I would recommend right now.
Oh, fantastic.
And also just go outside and talk to people, or go outside and just be in the woods. Those are things I recommend.
Oh, for sure. And definitely the woods. But I think your point of kind of that slow journalism of going out and seeing people face to face, especially where we're so digitally interfaced, to do things face to face, it just engenders so much more trust. And journalists are just under fire. And to have that face to face and a handshake, I think it goes a long way.
It's going to give you the best story. It's going to give you like the real breathing, living story. If you slow down and just what is it? The art of fact. Think of it as the art of fact, and rather than like a piece, you got to do a piece.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. Well, Mira, this has been great. So thank you so much for the time and for this amazing piece you wrote for the Atavist. So I look forward to when we can maybe have another conversation of this nature again.
Yeah, come visit me anytime you'd like. You can stay with us.
Oh, fantastic. That's awesome. Nice.
All right. Thank you for your time too.
Awesome. Yes. Hey, thanks to you for listening, coming this far, being along for the CNFing journey. Also, thanks to Mira and Sayward. As always, magazine.atavist.com is where you can read the story. BrendanMayer.com, where you can subscribe to the monthly Rage Against the Algorithm newsletter that went out today, November's edition. You can also subscribe to the podcast on your podcast platform of choice, and that is going to do it. As always, stay wild, CNFers, and if you can interview. See ya.